going on, guys? Welcome back to Weekly Wheaties. This week, episode 18, we're going to talk about a little bit more in depth of the topic from last week when we talked about project management and the importance of it. This week, I want to dive into a specific part of that known as the project management triangle and a few other things that kind of come about that I've thought about that's in my head that you now get to hear and hopefully enjoy and find useful. So the project management triangle is literally a triangle that has three corners, and each corner dictates something else. So at the top, typically you see what's referred to as scope. In the bottom two corners, you have either budget or cost, sometimes it's referred to, and then on the other side, time or schedule, depending on how you want to phrase it. And then when you combine these three together, in the middle, they always put quality. Now, depending on what you research and how you look into this, quality could, and has been known to replace scope. But I'm going to argue that can only happen if you're talking about a singular project, which we could arguably call a task, as opposed to a multifaceted project that has a bunch of nuances and a bunch of different things that happen to it. Because when you have a big project with a bunch of moving pieces, you need scope, because scope changes over the time of the project, which affects the cost and the time, but quality might not always change. So I'll talk about some examples in a little bit, but we need to understand the difference between a project and a task. A project might have multiple tasks to it, but you can also quote project management a task, if that kind of makes sense. Because you could have a task that has cost, time, and quality, or some level of scope to it, but all projects are going to have scope. And the underlying theme or assumption is quality. Now, when you look at a project on a grander scheme of things, there's a few ways to approach it. You could have multiple different types of people come in and manage that task, manage that project, and all have varying degrees of outcomes. And I mean that in regards to cost, scope, and time, because those are the three pieces of a project. And one person might come in as a PM or a project manager, and they might focus a lot more intently on the scope and making sure that they're only doing things that necessary to the project. Their cost might be cheaper. Their time might be a little bit longer or a little bit shorter. That's project manager one. You get project manager two in, they come in and look at it and say, okay, this is our must-haves of the scope. These are some what I would like, and these are if we can get them. That's great. If not, so they'll start out when they're doing all their discussions and be like, this is everything I want. And as they talk through the project and the cost starts to change and the time starts to fluctuate, they'll start knocking things off of the scope, right? Because they realize not everything is immediate, not everything is necessary, not everything is as important as something else. Whereas project manager one came in and they're solely looking at everything like, this is all must-haves. I can't work anywhere within these pieces of scope. We either got to spend more money or we got to take more time, right? Whereas project manager two, the budget stayed the same, the time frame stayed the same, they just knocked things off of the scope. They could absolutely end up in the same place as project manager number one. It just might be differences in stress for that person or for the people involved. It might be differences in the people that were actually hired or people that might actually have to be fired or let go. Like there's different, like I said, nuances to each project, but it can look completely different based on who the project manager is. First project might be solely looking at this from a success standpoint and saying, these are my non-negotiables. I must have them in order to be successful as far as the scope is concerned. And cost and time, we don't really care how that looks. Whereas Project Manager 2 is looking at the whole picture and saying, well, I can fluctuate my scope, I can fluctuate my cost, I can fluctuate my time. I might start here with costs and we might be under budget, but the scope isn't what I originally thought. Or we might go over the original time. Or they might say, this is where we started. We finished early, but it cost me a little bit more, or I didn't get all the pieces to the scope that I wanted. So there's a difference between adding things to your scope, or in this case, even adding or removing things from the original scope. Again, no right or wrong way, just differences of opinion on how to approach that. And then you might have this project manager number 3, where no matter, and none of this is meant to be taken positive or negative, it's just showing the differences that are there. Project manager 3 might have the same mindset as project manager 1, whereas this is what success looks like, but the scope is greater than what project manager 1's was. And that might be because their mindset is all focused on redundancy. And they want to know that if this fails, this can step up and take the place. Or if this can't come to fruition, this can step in and take over and maybe look similar when the project is complete. And all these things I'm talking about from an outside standpoint, you might look at all 3 of these end projects and say they are exactly the same, nothing's changed. And you might be 100% correct, but the way they got there was different. And that could be solely based on where that project manager puts importance on the cost, the scope, or the time, at least of that project. Now, the redundancy aspect could be you're just trying to be careful for any potential failures, but it could also be you're trying to be more reactive rather than proactive. Because when a project manager comes into a task or a project for a company, if they're an outside entity, their mindset might be different than someone that's internal to that organization. Because I talked a little bit about success versus redundancy and how that looks, but you also have reactive versus proactive. Project Manager 1's mindset is all about reactive. This was the problem, this is how we solve it. Project Manager 2 might come in and say, this was the problem, this is how you keep that from happening in the future. And the completely different mindset of what the approach is, again, in regards to cost, scope, and time. The reactive, probably going to cost less, probably going to happen quicker, probably going to be a smaller scope. Whereas the proactive, where you're, again, helping with redundancy or helping keeping the time down in the future, it's going to cost more money, it's going to have more of a scope, and it's going to take longer. There's no way around that. I'm speaking in generalities, but for the most part, that's the case. So I have an example. There's a quote I heard. I have no idea where I heard this from, so I'm sorry I'm not quoting my sources correctly. It came from a book. I'm just not sure which one. The quote is, people don't wash rental cars. Now, if you think about that for a second, of course, we don't wash a rental car, Garrett. It's not ours. And that's exactly the point. When you own something and you take ownership of that thing, your mindset completely changes on how you want to approach a project. So I'll use an example I have. As the, quote, IT admin, help, nerd, whatever word you want to put it, for my local church that I attend, I am one of the people who help with IT issues, right? I'm not the only one in the end all be all, but if there's a major issue, typically I get brought in some way, shape, or form. That's no way a complaint. That's just kind of setting the stage. And I appreciate that because I get to know what all is kind of happening and I can be at the forefront and foresee for future issues that might come up. Well, me being proactive, let's say we have an issue where we need to replace Wi-Fi or the Wi-Fi is messing up. Well, there's these things called access points. The reactive aspect would be, I just replaced the one where we're complaining, where people are complaining about the Wi-Fi. The proactive would be, well, if they're complaining here, they're eventually going to complain over here. We're going to have the same issues because we have the same hardware across the campus. We might as well replace them all or look at a complete upgrade. The proactive aspect is going to cost a lot more money up front, but in the long run, it's going to probably even itself out. Might be cheaper, might be more expensive. That's going to come to find out in the future. The reactive would be, okay, we're having trouble with this one, we're only going to replace that one. And then when this one has an issue, we'll only replace that one. And you just kind of play the game as you go. The cost, you might end up being the same throughout, but you're being reactive every time and you're causing issues every time. Meaning, for this person who is having the problems that brought it up to you, you're causing downtime for them. And then later on, you're causing downtime for this person. Later on, you're causing downtime for this person. And the whole time, you're being caused downtime every time that happens. So if you take let's say it's 10 downtimes for each access point, and let's say it takes an hour for each one, you make it 10 hours and you just go ahead and replace them all up front. It costs you the same 10 hours, but you only had the one person down for that 1 hour, and maybe the entire section down, or the entire campus, if you will, down for 1 hour. So you only cause maybe 2 hours trouble for everyone else, but it's 10 hours for you. You might even can do it on an off time where you don't cause anybody else any issues. Whereas if you didn't go do it that same day, you might cause an issue for them the whole next day or the whole next week until you can get to it, right? Now, I'm very specific situation for me as an example, because I'm not on there full time. But the premise is sound, and it's the same premise across any project, no matter how great or small it is. You can add up all these hours, and if you pull them together and you're more reactive, you're causing less downtime for the future. Neither way is 100% right. It's all up to each individual, each organization, what the budget allows for, what the time allows for, what the scope allows for, right? So, I kind of mentioned this already, but your mindset is what dictates how that happens. I don't really work on computers on the side anymore, but when I did, that's a task, but I view it as a project because I have to schedule it. I have to do some diagnosing. I have to see what the problem is. But when I worked on computers for people, at least in the last few times I've done this, I was very much of the mindset that I'm not going to charge somebody a ton of money because it's going to take me a while to work on their computers. Because if I wasn't doing it full time, I would have to take it home, do it on nights, do it on weekends. So the thought was, either you can pay me extra and I can do it quicker because I'm sacrificing my own time, or this is what I charge, period, because the scope and the quality doesn't change. I'm going to do the same work regardless. It's just going to, if the cost is going to stay the same, the time has to extend, right? And I obviously didn't get rich working on computers because that's not what I do for a living. And that was never my goal or intention. But if somebody needed something done quickly, I was very upfront and say, look, this is what I charge. It's going to take me a week or so to get to it. If you need it done quicker, either you can pay me a lot more money because I have to sacrifice X, Y, or Z, or here's a number you can call of a local IT company that can get on this. They're going to charge less than what I would charge you anyway. So I was very clear, very adamant. I never wanted to take advantage of anybody. I try to treat people the way I would want to be treated. But that's kind of my example of why you got to be careful with the project task, because sometimes if the quality or the scope can't change, you only have two things to look at. It's either cost or time. And if one's going to change, the other has to change to accompany it. So how does that look? It's different for everybody. So another example I'll kind of give you that, again, I can't remember exactly where I read this. I'm sure somewhere for work. But this is regarding California, who I don't work for. The California Department of Transportation, whether it was state or a county or a city, I'm not 100%, they had a project where a bridge needed to be replaced and upgraded for, I don't know the specifics, but there was like a 4-lane bridge. It might have been a 2-lane bridge they were upgrading to 4 lanes. I'm not sure. regardless, the bridge had to completely be torn down and redone. And the way the project could have worked, they could have temporarily shut down half of the bridge for 2 years. Basically, 1 year they would work on this half, shut it down, switch it to the other side, shut down for another year, work on this half, and basically inconvenience their community for 2 years and make it to where this 2-lane was now, or a 4-lane, whatever, was now a single lane each way. Or it might have been 2 lanes that were shutting down to even 1 lane and having to take turns, where like that lane would come for a while, then this lane would come for a while. Or they would completely shut down all lanes for 6 months. So the question to the community was, do you want to be inconvenienced a little bit for a long time or inconvenienced a lot for a short amount of time? Ultimately, what they decided as a community, it was voted on either by the locals or the board members or whatever. I'm not sure on the specifics, but they ultimately agreed on, we'll be inconvenienced a lot for a short amount of time. So cool. Day one, boom, road shut down, can't go this way for 6 months. And there was a lot of communication. There were signs up, they were blocking the road, detours, what have you, to help with the locals, the public as they're traveling through. But day one, roads get shut down. They do all their work. When they go to open it up for basically this new road, it actually wasn't 6 months later. It was 4 months later. They were able to do the work a lot quicker than what they originally thought. I'm again, the specifics I don't know, but they may have been able to work 24/7 rather than having to shut down and not work at night, because nighttime is actually not safe for road construction in some areas, especially if it's a highway that's not traveled a lot. It's just not safe. People drive fast. And it's not safe for the workers that are there. Even if there's adequate signage, it's hard to see, again, regardless if there's lighting, signage, what have you. So they were able to work 24/7. They were able to not have to stop for certain things. If they were waiting on something over here, they might could have worked on this instead. Whatever it was, they were able to speed it up. I'm pretty sure it was under budget, under time, with the scope staying the same. So, again, I don't know the right answers, but that's the way that you have to look at this project management triangle. When you change one thing, it doesn't always just change here. It can change something over here as well in regards to scope or time or budget. Quality is one thing that most agree on that you can't change, because there's certain specifications, things must meet, certain requirements your people might have. So as you go out your project management world, you're doing this at work, you're doing this at school, whatever, keep these in mind. What can you dictate? What can you change? What can fluctuate? Look it up. Look up the project management triangle. There's a lot of research on that. The PMP exam, Scrum, Agile, all of these types of certifications have things that can help with that. So hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. Until next time.